Walking away from the window, the girl said to herself that she was even surprised, because she thought that all this would not be so easy for her, and now she does not feel anything. But the very next moment she turned her head to the sound coming from the door. A boy in the usual noble clothes entered her room, forcefully opening the door. Karl Ulrich Echmont stood in front of her in his own person and looked at her silently. He looked visibly displeased as he asked where she was going, but the girl did not answer anything. She sat silently opposite, not reacting to his presence. Enraged by her silence, Echmont began to shout, saying that he was talking to her and asking where she had gone. But the girl was silent again, only turning her head to the side when the boy was too close to her. Shaking her by the shoulders, he asked, raising his voice, if she was really going to him. Karl grew angrier, asking again if she was leaving him for Lionel Valdora. That girl only asked if it really matters who she goes to, because the most important thing is that she doesn't want to be near him, Karl, anymore. But he said that his Empress should be near. She asked with a smile only one word, Empress. She said that he called her that, despite the fact that he had dethroned her. The girl was still looking at him as she said that it was even better, and that if he hadn't dethroned her, she would still have said what she was going to say. The seat next to him was free. All the gaiety disappeared, and she already seriously said that she renounces the title of Empress. She rode in a carriage through her own lands with an escort, but all she could do was look out the window. This girl is the crown princess of the Kotrov Empire, as well as the best striker, because she can clear the tower with her own hands. Her mother said that she had a letter from Emperor Echmont and gave instructions to her daughter that she could become an empress. Adelaide told her mother that she must be so worried that she did not want to leave her daughter in her own empire. But the Empress said that she thought that her daughter would respond well to the proposal, but she was mistaken. She asked what was the matter. Coming closer, the woman asked her daughter in a whisper whether she regretted the day when her heart was heavy. When the girl asked her mother to stop, she only asked if she really remembered the debt to her brother. Adelaide widened her eyes, hearing the question from her mother about what would happen to her children, even though she would be devoted to Lucio. She asked about those close to her, whether everyone really shares her position, and whether she herself has doubts. Not paying attention to her daughter's emotions, she continued, saying that her very existence was dangerous for the Empire, and that she had to go for the sake of her brother and the Empire. Sitting now in the carriage that was taking her away, Adelaide remembered this conversation with her mother. Opening the chest, she looked at the photo of Karl Ulrich Echmont, who was calling her to marry him. But then the girl noticed that some folded paper had fallen out with the photo, which was now lying under her foot. She looked with an impenetrable face at the information about Karl Ulrich's concubine, whose name was Diane Poutier. Adelaide thought about what was driving her crazy, that she had crossed the sea to get to this continent and that there was no one she could trust. At the same time, the ruler of the Empire Echmont was sitting in his castle and was looking at the letter in front of him. He even put his hand to his face, not taking his eyes off the photo of his future wife. He wondered if they were taking a photo for the future husband somewhere in a chair, and with a smile. And then he smiled to himself, thinking that Adelaide Kotrov was coming here not as his wife, but as an empress. He thought that even this photo did not convey all the audacity of his future wife. But the man was visibly upset, thinking that it would be much better if she came to him as his wife, and not as an empress. A month after Echmont's reflections, Captain of his Guard and Minister of Defense Lionel Valdor stood with his men and said that he could see that the girl had almost arrived. And after that, Lionel spurred his horse and galloped off on business. Peeking out of the window, the girl asked how much longer they had to go, and the maid said that this was only the first gate, and it would take another hour to get to the other gate. Lionel approached the carriage, comparing himself to the horses. He went straight to the door to see who exactly was riding in the carriage. He knocked on the door of the carriage because he saw the maid standing nearby. He apologized as he waited for an answer, and then he said who he was, the Minister of Defense and the Captain of the Guard, giving his name, and he said that he came to accompany her. The maid called the princess, saying that she would open the door if she was ready. Adelaide looked at Lionel. She changed her dress into comfortable trousers and a blouse with a waistcoat. The man froze, feeling a drop of sweat running down his cheek. He almost bawled his eyes out when he saw the color of the princess's eyes. They were golden, and then apologized. The girl offered her hand to the boy because he was waiting to help her out of the carriage. He wondered again, now that he saw her clothes, which certainly did not suit a lady according to their fashion. Kotrov interrupted the guard captain's thoughts by thanking him for meeting her. Turning her head to him, the girl said her name. "She is Adelaide Kotrov." She looked intently at the interlocutor. The man, without taking his eyes off her, introduced himself once more. "He is Lionel Valdor." He was as if enchanted. When she saw the men on horseback waiting for them, she once again cast her eyes at the captain of the guard, saying that she was very tired from riding in a carriage and sailing a ship here for 2 whole months. Adelaide asked if the minister had an extra horse, and after he asked why, she replied that she wanted to go for a ride. One of the soldiers told Her Highness that the war horses were very stubborn and that it would be difficult for her to stay in the saddle. She asked with a smile how they had the right to worry about her, Princess Kotrov, and doubt her abilities. But after a few minutes, she was racing along with the other horses, feeling the wind around her and intently following the road. Valdor looked at the princess in surprise, thinking that she was really not in vain on her table, because she was a skilled rider. When they arrived, the girl sat next to the horse, and with a smile she stroked him in praise, saying that he was a young man. Lionel dismounted from his horse and, coming closer, called to the princess. Standing right in front of her, he asked if she felt better, to which Adelaide replied that it was thanks to him. She said she wanted to ride some more, but asked with a slight hint that it would be a problem if she showed up at the palace like that. With a slight smile, Lionel Waldor said that she really had better go to the palace in a carriage. Glancing at him, the princess showed that she really listened to him and said that they would do so. When the princess was already at the carriage, she turned to the minister and said that he had added some color to her sad day, and that she hoped that someday they would ride together again. And Lionel could only look at the already closed carriage door, near which the future Empress was sitting a few seconds ago. He thought that Adelaide Kotrov was an unusual woman and that she would become the Empress of Echmont. The Emperor glanced disapprovingly at the door of the office, which opened, and heard the arrival of a maid from the Ivory Palace. He, almost rolling his eyes in displeasure, put his finger to his temple and asked what happened there. Bowing to the Emperor, the maid said that Lady Diane was asking for help. The girl was just standing and choosing a tiara among those she had, holding one of them in her hands. But she turned her head to the door, behind which she heard footsteps approaching. The door suddenly opened and a domineering woman appeared on the threshold. It was Elizabeth Ulrich, the Emperor's half-sister and the only female of the Ulrich family. The blonde smiled as she greeted the Grand Duchess, turning her head towards her. Leaving the tiaras, the girl with the same smile went to the Duchess, greeting her and asking what brought her to the Ivory Palace. Sitting down, Elizabeth asked if all those tiaras were a gift from the Emperor, or if she no longer needed permission to enter the imperial treasury. Sitting opposite, the blonde said with a smile that everything was not like that, and that she was just choosing a crown for the Empress. The Duchess said with a smile that the situation is very interesting, because the concubine of the Emperor chooses the crown for the Empress herself. And what if Kotrov's empire finds out? There will be a huge scandal. Bending over, Elizabeth touched one of the crowns, asking Diane what she thought of this one. Holding the same crown, the Duchess said with a satisfied smile that only his sister could make a better choice than the Emperor's concubine. But the girl cleared her throat and said with a smile, almost naive, that she had no right to this, because she was the only divorced woman in the whole empire and had no right to help with the preparations for the wedding. Elizabeth jumped up from her seat, saying that Diane was a badass, and asked how she could even say that to her face. But the door opened with a loud bang, and the Emperor shouted at his sister on the threshold, asking her what she was doing here. The Duchess squinted at her brother, visibly displeased that he had appeared in this palace. Diane also squinted at the Emperor, thinking he had arrived just in time. But the next moment, the girl began to play the role of a naive lover, putting her hand on her heart and addressing His Majesty. With huge eyes, she said that he had finally come. The Emperor looked down at his concubine, not saying a word, and only wondering what was happening. Turning back to her brother completely, Elizabeth thought with an almost imperceptible smile that his mistress was that cunning fox. Raising his eyebrows in anger, Karl Ulrich asked what they had done here. But the sister echoed him, and frowning, asked him if he had so much to do that he was following his mistress. She said that of course he wouldn't believe her, but she didn't do anything with Diane. But the blonde began to sob, wiping the tears that fell from her eyes one by one. Seeing this, the Emperor looked at the concubine and asked his sister why the mistress was crying if she was telling the truth. Raising her head with her childish expression, she told the Emperor to stop and that his sister was not guilty of anything, and that it was all because of her. He listened while Diane said that she was preparing for his wedding, which most likely the Duchess did not like. Elizabeth almost rolled her eyes at the spectacle, saying that she was extreme again, because she grabbed an innocent person by the throat, and she added that the mistress is being excluded under the guise of preparation, and she can't say anything to her. But Karl asked what the words about exclusion meant, because there was no worthy woman in the imperial family to help with the preparations. He hinted at her divorce, and when she heard that her behavior was unacceptable, because Diane was helping and she was ungrateful, the Duchess said that it was also unacceptable to mention her divorce. Closing his eyes to calm himself, he said that he was repeating for the last time that he had entrusted all the wedding preparations to Diane. And then he looked directly into his sister's eyes, saying that the Duchess would have to stand aside and watch, and asked if he had explained clearly. Elizabeth said that she was already sick of the place, and as soon as the ceremony was over, she would go home and not stay here. Karl Ulrich silently turned and went to the door to leave. But Diane called him, trying to stop the Emperor. As soon as her brother left, Elizabeth fell on the sofa and closed her eyes from all the emotions that were boiling inside. Meanwhile, Diane thought about the fact that the Emperor is the sun, and everyone who is close to him receives all his warmth. And does that give his sister the right to bother him like that? Diane thought to herself that she was his moon as he was the sun. The Duchess thought that this wench had so blindfolded her brother that he could not see reality except what the concubine whispered. She wondered if the Empress would bear it. Diane stroked the Emperor's hair as he rested his head in her lap and told him he needed to go. But while she was massaging his temples, he said that he wanted to lie like that a little longer without even opening his eyes. The girl thought to herself, looking at her lover, how handsome he was, because she liked absolutely everything about him. She also thought that he was all hers and that she would never share him with anyone. The Emperor immediately sat down on the sofa when he felt something drip on his face. He was looking expectantly at his mistress. Diane was sitting in front of him in tears, looking directly at him with her huge eyes. But when he called her by name, the girl started apologizing and wiping tears from her eyes. He asked if she was crying because of the Duchess, with whom the incident had happened a few hours before. Diane shook her head, saying it wasn't, and asked what would happen if the future Empress didn't like her. With tears in her eyes, she asked if she would have to leave the palace then. But she added that she is ready to fulfill any of his will if it is more convenient for him. Turning his head to the side, he put his hand to his face and promised that the Empress would not be a threat to her. She began to awkwardly wipe away her tears again, apologizing to the Emperor and saying that he was always getting into trouble because of her. But then she caressed his face, looking straight into his eyes and saying that he is the only one for her. Diane hugged the Emperor, saying that she did not care that he would have an Empress, because as long as she had him, she didn't care. Karl was visibly tired. But while he did not see, the girl thought that no one would ever take him away from her, even if his wife tried to do it. A young man was sitting in front of Diane, who was reading, and asked the two maids if she was picking out a formal suit for the Emperor. The brother, who bore an uncanny resemblance to Diane, asked how she could be so calm. The girl looked at her brother in silence, thinking about the fact that there were other people in the room. The blue-eyed blonde she turned to looked up and showed her face, as Diane had asked, but she appreciated the soft blonde blue eyes and thought that even though the maid did not stand out. But the girl ordered all the maids to leave because she wants to talk to her brother alone. When they left, the girl told her brother that she had warned him not to take blondes with blue eyes as servants. But he reacted differently, asking if she really thought that he would sit and choose, because blondes with such eyes in the Empire, at least a damn. Diane began to get nervous, angry. She said that he would select them himself to fulfill her request and asked if he understood her. And when he agreed, the girl added that he should be careful with his words in front of the servants, and if he could not control himself, then it was better for him not to come to her at all. Her brother asked her if she could endure all this, because the Empress is not an ordinary woman, she is the princess of the Kotrov Empire. The girl asked, carefully looking at her relative, what he was hinting at. The brother said that although the Emperor behaved as if he could not live without her, he still did not allow her to take the place of the Empress. While his sister listened, he continued, saying that the princess, though for pro forma, would still try to get rid of her. And, if you believe the rumors, she is very beautiful. The brother continued by asking Diane how many times he had told her that she had to get pregnant before he found a wife. But Diane broke off with a scream, asking her brother if he really thinks it's as easy as he says. She quickly calmed down and, closing her eyes, said that the Empress would not receive any privileges from him. When he asked what she was talking about, the girl explained that the Emperor had a very negative attitude to the word Empress. She looked up at her brother with a smile, saying that he did not make her his wife because he loves her very much. But the brother said that it was a delusion and that Diane did not know men. Love always passes, and their love with the Emperor is no exception. And when she lowered her head and said that she knew, he asked again, not believing his ears. With a sly smile, she said that love for a living person always fades, but love for a dead person will never pass. The smile did not fade when she said that the Emperor saw his late mother in her. She was looking at the portrait inside the pendant that hung around her neck. A woman with the same hair and eyes, an uncanny resemblance to Diane herself. She died from the tyranny of the previous ruler. With a satisfied smile, the girl explained that this is why her future wife already hated him even before they met, and she asked whether he thought that the Emperor would fall out of love with her. She asked her brother which option was better, the Empress, who only had a title, or she, who had the Emperor's love and power over him. The day after Adelaide arrived at the palace, she looked at the line of people who wanted to greet her. She settled comfortably on the couch. She looked at the people in front of her with a smile, realizing that this was done to show herself from the best side in front of the future Empress. When the meetings were over, she sat on the couch and thought that even now that everything was over, there had been no word from the Emperor. Accepting that he did not come, the princess ordered the maids to prepare a bath for her because she was very tired. She, squinting at the maids, told them to send everyone away and tell them to come tomorrow, because she would not receive anyone today. In her nightgown, Adelaide came out of the bathroom, letting her hair down and getting ready for bed. There was a girl in her room who was meekly waiting for her to return to her room. It was Diane, the Emperor's mistress, about whom the future ruler did not know. The princess looked at the girl and wondered who she was, because all the guests had to wait for her in the living room. The blonde said with a smile that she was glad to welcome the princess to the palace. She gave her name as Diane Poitiers. Remembering that she was the Emperor's concubine, the princess said that her clothes were all wet because of her wet hair and ordered the blonde to dry them for her. But when the princess sat down, a maid came up to her and said that she would do everything. It turned out that Adelaide simply ignored the blonde. The mistress mentally sighed with relief because the princess will not like the Emperor at all. Adelaide squinted, wondering why her lover was smiling like that, not believing her eyes. To the complete surprise of the maid, Diane offered the princess to dry her hair. Turning her head towards her, Adelaide asked if she was a servant. Rising from her chair, the princess said why she wanted to dry her hair if she was not a servant, and what she was doing in her bedchamber without her permission. Diane looked like she was repentant. She apologized if she offended the princess by coming. She said that she wanted to tell her about something, that's why she came. Adelaide asked what exactly, and the blonde said with a smile that she wanted to talk about the Emperor's tastes. The princess couldn't believe her ears, wondering in her mind what that mistress had just said. Diane said that she would be interested to know what exactly the Emperor likes. First, said the girl, the Emperor likes wavy hair, and therefore the princess should dry her hair so that it is wavy, showing the waves with her finger. And then she said that the princess, by the way, looked so pale and asked if perhaps she should put blush on her cheeks. Adelaide silently grabbed the blonde's hair, looking calm, but anger seethed inside her. How dare she give her advice? Kotrov, looking into her eyes, asked what she said earlier. Taste? And then she let go of her lover and, sitting on a chair with her back to her, ordered to bring a glass of alcohol. Diane was visibly confused. She said that she had heard that an alcoholic drink was very popular in this empire. Adelaide said she wanted to try it, and then she would go to bed. Diane could not come to her senses until the maid went to get the drink, hearing the princess's questions, asking why she had come to tell about what she was not asked to do. She began to smile, saying that the princess did not know about the Emperor's sake, and she wanted to help. Adelaide interrupted her, asking if she faked here and there, spreading information about other people's tastes. Taking the drink brought by the maid, the princess said that, if so, she should also convey her wishes to the Emperor. She said with a noticeable smile that she likes men who will speak their minds in person and look her in the eye. And then she said that she almost forgot the main thing. She did not give in to her own principles and is not going to do it in the future. And that's why she doesn't need any information. With a satisfied smile, she bowed her head on her hand and said that Diane just needed to adapt to other people's tastes. And when she finished, she said that she was free and could go. The mistress visibly brightened, standing in front of the future empress. Squeezing out a smile, the blonde said that she must have made a mistake when she came here and apologized for this visit. Pulling herself together, the girl smiled wider and wished the princess a good rest. And she told her to call her at any time if she had any questions. Adelaide sat like a true empress, watching her mistress walk away. She crossed her leg, holding the alcohol in her other hand. Kotrov thought about the words her mistress had said before she left, and said that she had ordered the maids to take care of her. She thought that she was speaking as the landlady, and Adelaide was her guest. She massaged the bridge of her nose, closing her eyes and saying aloud that she did not have time to come, and immediately met the emperor's mistress. On the day of the wedding, the girl thought that I, too, had found a lover, because he never came to her before the wedding. She knew that such rumors had been circulating in the empire for quite some time. Looking at her wedding dress, the princess thought about the fact that Diane Poitiers was feeding everyone in the palace. As it turned out loud, the girl told herself that these two were acting as if she was here by accident. She noticed the bow on the dress. The maid brought her crown, revealing a beautiful crown of white gold resting on a pillow. Standing in front of the mirror, Adelaide looked at how the crown looked on her head, while the maid helped her put on the jewelry. She asked the girl who brought the crown if it was made of ordinary gold, when she asked if she did not like it. After removing the crown, she said that she liked gold, not silver, and ordered that the crown be replaced, as there was still time before the ceremony. The emperor, meanwhile, was also gathering. He called to Diane, whose hands were shaking, and she herself was crying, bowing her head and standing right in front of him. The girl leaned into him, apologizing for her behavior, and he remembered a woman as small and defenseless as the one standing before him. And while he was thinking about his mother, whom he wanted to protect from the Empress, Diane said that Adelaide was a very beautiful and noble woman. The blonde tearfully said that someone like her would probably look like an ordinary maid against her background. And she herself thought that these words would affect Karl, because his mother was a white maid. The emperor furrowed his brows, thinking about Diane's words and remembering his mother. He grabbed her by the shoulders, asking if she had lied when she said that nothing had happened between them the day she went to say hello. Taking his face in her hands, she said that nothing had happened, but when the princess asked who she was, the girl was at a loss because she had nothing to answer, saying that it is important for her that he be only with her, but she is asking a lot. The girl began to lose consciousness, scaring the emperor. He asked, frightened, "What is the matter with her?" Having lowered her to the floor, the emperor called for help, and the girl held her hand in front of her face, trying to control her bad feeling. With tears in her eyes, she looked up at Karl Ulrich and begged him not to abandon her. Everyone began to whisper, because the emperor was late and there was no news from him. Meanwhile, Adelaide herself was waiting for him at the altar, dressed in a white dress with red elements and only listening to these whispers. She wondered if this Poitiers had detained him, and the guests whispered about the fact that no matter what, the bride was standing alone at the altar. Kotrov wondered if Karl really wanted to make her a laughingstock. Adelaide, standing alone at the altar, thought that she had no one to even ask what was happening. She was here by herself. She felt like she was on a battlefield without a weapon. She remembered the words of the servant, who had said with tears in her eyes that her honor and dignity were in her own hands, and that in Ulrich's empire she should rely only on herself. Remembering the nanny's words, Kotrov thought that it was necessary to save face and dignity. Returning to the servants, she ordered someone to bring her a chair where she would sit while waiting for the emperor. While everyone was whispering, the servants placed a heavy chair made of red cloth in front of the hall of aristocrats. Under the same whisper, Adelaide settled comfortably on the chair, carefully sitting down so that the dress would not be damaged. Those present were speechless at what they saw. They couldn't believe that the emperor's bride really sat down, because she would wait for the emperor sitting down. Looking at the reaction she caused from the local aristocrats, Adelaide smiled. One of the ministers, meanwhile, was whispering in Lionel's ear, "Valdor, that it is noticeable that the girl is confident in herself and will do as she sees fit." Her smile faded a little as she tried to make out the man staring straight at her. Was it Lionel? Waldor? Elizabeth Ulrich thought with a smile that it was impossible to look away from Adelaide and that she had transformed the chair into her throne in an instant. She thought that all the nobles were confused now. Getting up from her seat, she said aloud that she must say hello to the Empress. The Duchess came closer and greeted her with a smile, saying that her name was Elizabeth Ulrich Grand and that she would very much like to meet her. Another man stood nearby, interrupting Elizabeth's conversation. He introduced himself as August Ulrich Despona. Standing up from her seat as a sign of respect, Adelaide smiled and said that she didn't know how to introduce herself, so she wanted the wedding to be over soon so that she could confidently say who she was. But she said with a smile that she is the future Ulrich Echmont. But then she added her name, Adelaide. Elizabeth said with a smile that she had already become the Empress of this empire, and Augustus's smile visibly supported her words. He said she could use that name. Other aristocrats began to say that Augustus was right, referring to her as Her Majesty. With a smile, Adelaide said that Augustus and Elizabeth could also sit down, and they would all wait for the Emperor together. They were visibly confused. The Duchess thought that the girl was clearly not as simple as she seemed. She immediately showed them to their place, sitting back in her chair. With a smile, Elizabeth wondered what Karl's face would look like when he saw her. When the door opened, Adelaide glanced to the side, watching what was happening. The Emperor walked down the aisle between the rows of guests, not taking his eyes off her and looking displeased. While all the guests got up and stood at his appearance, he stopped a few steps away. He couldn't believe that Adelaide was meeting him sitting down. Getting up from her seat, Kotrov ordered the servants to remove the chair. While Karl Ulrich looked at his future wife, he thought that she was the exact meaning of the word Empress. Standing right in front of her, the Emperor gave a dry, "Greetings." Feeling a little embarrassed by the situation, the girl responded with the same greeting, but more formally, addressing him as you. Analyzing the cold expression on the Emperor's face, Adelaide could not understand why he was like that, because it was he who was late for the wedding. Although she noticed that the portrait did not convey his beauty, the assistant called the girl by the title of Empress, giving her the bride's bouquet, while Adelaide's eyes widened in surprise. The assistant next to Karl told him to take the bride's hand and walk with her to the altar, but he just passed by, not even thinking of taking the girl's hand, and went to the altar alone. Elizabeth turned her head, looking at Carla's back and not understanding what was happening. Those present were visibly surprised, opening their mouths at the actions of their emperor. Did he refuse to hold hands with the Empress? This was watched by ministers, one of whom was Lionel. A man nearby said in surprise, "This is how it is." Adelaide looked down, feeling neglected. She could not understand what was happening and clenched her fists in anger to keep herself in her hands. The servant timidly called her again, telling her to take the wedding bouquet. Waving the bouquet and saying that it was not needed, she stood next to the Emperor at the altar. He said without even turning his head to her, so she wouldn't expect too much from him. Hearing her keep going and not stopping, Adelaide asked what he meant, turning her head towards him. He said he heard her ask Diane Poitiers if she was a servant when they approached the priest. Adele said that she entered her house without permission, so she inquired. He said that Diane was not a servant and told her to be careful with expressions in her direction. Similarly, without even looking at her, Karl Ulrich said that today they would not have a wedding night and that she would not be waiting for him. She turned her head towards him, not understanding what was even going on, while the priest said that they should take their vows to each other. When the Emperor took the oath, but did not say about loyalty, and the priest said that from this moment on, she bears the surname Ulrich Echmont, the girl thought how everything was driving her. Diane looked out the window and asked her maids if the ceremony was over yet. One of them with a timid smile, and under the surprised look of the other, if she would still eat, because she had not eaten anything for so many days. Another hissed and got angry. She asked if the other didn't think that the landlady didn't eat anything on purpose. Novenka began to make excuses, saying that this was not what she meant, and the other said that she should cut her nose, that the landlady simply could not eat. After apologizing, the other maid lashed out at her, saying why was she being taught at all, but the girl clearly did not understand what her fault was. The girl was startled when Diane pushed the other servant away and came closer. Looking at the expression on the landlady's face, the maid fell to her knees and begged for her forgiveness. She said she was new and just made a mistake. Diane sat down next to her, lifted the girl's head by the chin, and said she would explain exactly what she had done wrong. The blonde asked with a smile whether the girl said, "Ma'am," when addressing her. She asked if she was in the house of a shallow aristocrat and if the servant did not consider her a commoner. She looked into the girl's eyes and continued, saying that this was a palace and that she was its mistress. And then, Diane grabbed the maid by the hair, hurting her, and asked with a shout if she just called her madam. She said that she would not allow this to happen next time. The maid in tears begged forgiveness for her words. Standing up, she slapped the girl in the face and said that she was the mistress of the Ivory Palace, and that from now on, the maid should call her mistress. The girl was shaking from pain and hysteria. She cried and said that she already understood, addressing Diane as she wanted. A landlady. Turning around, she said that there are so many stupid people in the palace that it throws her off balance. She said that she wanted to lie down, while the other maid opened her mouth from everything that had happened. When the other maid asked if she should call the doctor, Diane glanced at her and agreed, thinking it would play into her hand. She reminded the maids to remember that she had not gotten out of bed all this time for everyone else, including the doctor. Sitting in the chair, Adelaide thought that she could not trust anyone in this palace, and that even the servants had to be treated with care. Closing her eyes, she thought that she lacked information, because the relations between the empires were not maintained, and there was no need to send their spies here. She thought that Karl hadn't even stopped at the fact that he was late for the ceremony, when she remembered his words about not expecting too much from him. She raised her eyebrows on the bridge of her nose, wondering if he really went to Diana Poitiers so brazenly, even on their wedding day. The emperor appeared in Diane's chambers, and while the maids were bowing, he asked if the girl had already woken up. They answered that not yet. He watched his mistress sleep, standing a few steps away from the bed. His memory showed the image of his mother, who once lay in the same way, waking up and calling him with tears in her eyes. She opened her eyes to see him in his wedding clothes. Diane thought that his wedding must have fallen apart after he passed out. The emperor kept his eyes on her and asked if she was coming to her senses. She sat up on the bed, asking if he had come to her right after the ceremony, and said he shouldn't have. But he only told her to stop. Lowering her eyes, she apologized, saying that she was the only one with problems. But she still looked at him again, saying that today it is better for the emperor to be near his wife. And probably, she was already waiting for him. Karl replied that he had already informed her that he would not come and that Diane should take better care of herself. Starting to cry, she said that her heart was breaking into pieces because she chose the dress, jewelry, and even the bride's bouquet. But I thought to myself that it was necessary to stop there because he would get tired of whining. But Karl Ulrich looked at Diane again with that look that had no emotion or feeling in it. He said that everything will be as it was. And the girl asked how he was going to introduce her to the Empress. With tears in her eyes, Diane said that he now had a wife and that the aristocrats would openly call her his mistress. The emperor simply asked what she wanted to be called instead. She told him to tell the Empress that she was his lover. She thought that the emperor could not be tamed, but thanks to his weaknesses, she could control him. All Karl Ulrich said in response to her words was, "Good." He agreed to introduce her like that. When she had achieved her goal, Diane held out her hand to the emperor and with a smile told him to embrace her. When he lay down next to her and hugged the girl, she thought that even if she did not become an empress, she would make sure that the place next to him was always free. The aristocrats whispered that the emperor went to the Ivory Palace immediately after the ceremony, and that the empress spent the wedding night alone. And the aristocratic girls discussed the fact that the emperor was late for the ceremony and that he was in the same palace before it. The other was poor. "How is the empress doing?" The girl said that she forbade him to enter her room, but the band still won't help her save face. While the other said that there is no point in the title if you don't even reach the level of a concubine. But the other tilted her gaze to the side and hissed at her. Before them stood Adelaide, who was accompanied by 2 maids. All the girls bowed with a smile, feeling out of place because the Empress could hear everything. And when she turned and left, one of the girls said that her heart was in her heels and asked if she heard what they said. Another said that in the future we should be more careful. Adelaide even flew into her own room, opening the door with the force of anger and resentment. Sitting down, she covered her eyes with her hands, thinking that she had expected something like this, but it turned out to be much more violent than she thought. She reflected on the fact that she had taken no one with her from home, not only because it was Echmont's order, but also because none of them deserved to suffer exile with her. Adelaide told herself, frowning, that she should come to her senses and not think about the past. She had to deal with what she had now. While preparing the wedding banquet, which is usually held on the third day after the wedding, Diane turned to the voice of the maids and said that nothing else was needed. She looked at the two thrones, thinking that because of the monsters that descended from the tower, she lost her parents, but she gained the status of the daughter of an earl and fell in love with the emperor. Diane thought that she had all this only thanks to her work and diligence, and that some girl who was born under a lucky star and became an empress has no right to stand above her. Touching the rose flowers and clutching them in her hand, the mistress thought that today the empress would not be able to enjoy her status. After all, she will be the main character of everything, because it used to belong to her. As she tried on her dress and now sipped her tea, Adelaide heard the maids apologizing, saying that Gotrov's measurements didn't match today's. When she heard that the wedding dress that fit was made by other craftsmen, she said that there was nothing she could do and told the maids to fix everything and that it would be okay if she was late for the banquet. The girls began to apologize because it is much more difficult to adjust clothes of a smaller size. She remembered her mother's words that she was constantly destroying monster towers, but the battle inside the palace should not seem insignificant. Her mother warned her not to relax even for a minute in Echmont. Adele concluded that they have two options. Either she will be in a dress of the wrong size, or she will not appear at the banquet in honor of her wedding. And then it came to her. She asked the maids if Diane Poitiers had prepared her wedding. She asked if the emperor was against it, although she knew the answer to this question. The maids lowered their heads, not having an answer to her question. With a smile, she ordered her wedding dress and crown brought, thinking to herself that Diane underestimated her if she wanted to show her own unattainability with cabbage. When everyone said that the banquet was wonderful, Diane modestly replied that Count d'Esponi had helped her a lot with the organization. The girl was certain that the Empress would not appear. Auguste replied with a smile that all this was only thanks to her refined taste. Aristocrats asked the landlady if she was wearing the same pendant, and also in the pile with earrings. One of the girls told Diane with a smile that it was said that the Emperor had spent his first wedding night at her place, which puzzled Diane. Pretending to be taken aback by the comments about their love, she told the girls to refrain from such words and that she felt sorry for the Empress. Diane began to tell that she had told the Emperor many times to go to his wife, while other aristocrats listened to her and tried to get close to her. One of the aristocrats, addressing her simply as landlady, asked if it was possible to lower taxes, because the harvest of their lands this year is bad. And the other asked if she could not send several strikers, because a tower appeared not far from her territory. Her brother said that their landlady was so modest when he interrupted their conversation, with a smile from the Howells, that by order of the Emperor, all matters concerning the palace are under the control of the landlady, and that the scope of these rights is obviously wider than that of the Emperor. Lionel interrupted them. Waldor said that their expressions could be qualified as treason. Brother Diane asked with a smile what the problem was, and whether he was wrong in what he said. The girl thought about the fact that it was necessary to stop them immediately, because the conflict in such a place, even with Duke Valdor, could end badly. He asked if all the reminders about the reason this feast was happening in the first place were necessary, and that Brother Diane needs to watch his words and actions if he cares about himself. The boy was startled by these words, because he was not used to being spoken to like that. He had already attacked Lionel because he was angry and wanted to start a fight, while his sister stopped him. But the scene ended, for the brother and sister were looking at the door in surprise when it was announced that the Empress had arrived. She was in her wedding dress, with the jewels and crown she had worn at the wedding, but that was not what Diane had chosen for her. Lionel kept his eyes on her, surprised that she had come and how she looked. Adelaide walked to her throne without looking at anyone and was currently climbing the stairs. Diane looked angrily at her rival because she was wearing a wedding dress. Sitting on her throne, Adelaide looked at the guests with a smile and said that she was a little late. Everyone watched as she confidently climbed the imperial stairs, which no one had the right to climb. Realizing that she did not like the atmosphere, she turned to Count d'Esponi, asking him if he was satisfied with the banquet. Augustus said with a smile that at last Her Majesty had come and that he had been waiting for her all evening, while Diane felt betrayed by the Earl. The guests whispered, not knowing what to do and whether they should say hello, and if so, who should do it first. Lionel ended this torment. Valdor, who stepped forward and addressed the Empress. He bowed, saying that he was glad to welcome her. The others followed his example, bowing their heads to the Empress. Adele said with a smile that she was happy to welcome them, and asked if she was all, those who stood behind Lionel, from the Duchy of Waldor. The others thought that it would not go that way and that they should all say hello to her. Diane thought that the Empress never looked at her, which made her angry because she wanted attention. She thought she would make Adelaide watch only her. She stood in the midst of the other ladies, drawing attention to herself, while the others whispered whether it was Madame Poitiers. They wondered how she could appear in such a place before the Empress, given her status. Diane greeted Her Majesty with a smile and said her name was Diane Poitiers. Adele said with a smile that she was glad to meet Lady Poitiers, thinking to herself that she had decided to put on a fun show for those present. Diane said with a smile that she was the one who arranged her wedding and this feast and asked if she liked it. When the maid brought the drink, Adele said she tried her best, but she couldn't wear the dress she had prepared. She, looking truly queenly, said as she tasted the drink that they were beautiful, but none suited her. But she said that she might not apologize, because everyone can make a mistake. It was noticeable that Diane did not expect this, losing all confidence, and simply looked at the Empress. Diane could hear the aristocrats whispering behind her back that since she was preparing the clothes, she did it specifically so that the Empress would not be at the banquet. The Emperor also appeared in the hall after his appearance was announced in the same way as his wives before that. He walked to his throne among the aristocrats, but looked at no one but Diane and Adele in front of him. Adelaide rose, saluting the Emperor as she should, and Diane looked at her and thought that she effortlessly dominates and possesses, because even today all attention was focused only on the Empress. She calmly watched what was happening, while Diane thought that if she was stabbed, not a drop of blood would flow. So cruel was Adele. The Emperor stopped in front of his mistress when he saw tears in her eyes, and she lowered her eyes and began to cry more. He glanced at his wife, who was watching everything. She looked them up and down, thinking that he must have concluded that she was the one who brought Diane to tears. Karl Ulrich asked Adele what she was doing now, while Diane pretended to cry. The girl, raising her head higher, said that she greeted her, and said that she also wondered why she was shedding tears here, and offered to ask her personally. The Emperor turned his head to his mistress, waiting for her answer. Diane said that she just wanted to congratulate the Empress. After that, Charles went to his throne, not even looking at his wife, while she watched his behavior. Smoothing the moment, music began to waft through the hall as the Emperor took his place on the throne. The aristocrats stood confused in the middle of the hall. Adelaide glared at the man who told her to stop touching Diane. He said that she was his lover and that his wife should leave her alone. Karl glanced at her, saying that he would not care about her lover, and asked if they had agreed. Smiling, she did not even look at him, telling him to convey these words to his beloved. Adele thought about the fact that she has a good feature. When she is angry, she starts to smile. She said that she met her twice, and both times she came to her alone. He did not answer anything, only turned away from his wife and looked around the hall, tasting the drink. And Adele watched him. After that, she calmly took her glass and looked at the aristocrats in front of her, who were watching the scene with a smile. One of Lionel's subjects said that the Empress did not lose her composure even at such a moment, as long as the Duke did not take his eyes off her. He replied gravely that it was, though he thought that she was trying to calm herself rather than actually remaining unmoved. After the feast in her room, she slammed her hands on the table, thinking that the whole situation was driving her mad. She thought about dresses that didn't fit, about smiles, hidden insults in her direction. And due to the number of emotions, her mana increased. Looking at the moon through the window, Adelaide felt her strength awakening. Adele tried to calm herself down, thinking that it was not early, and she had to restrain herself so as not to activate her powers. She poured herself an alcoholic drink, thinking that God was with that Diane Poitiers, soothing herself with alcohol. But she thought about what was being done with Karl, because if he can't live without his precious Diane, why didn't he make her Empress? Drunk, she lay down in bed and thought that he had brought her here, and now he was showing his character and thought that he must have a fetish for unrequited love. And she also thought that he was delusional, that he would not care about her lover. She remembered the words of her father, who told her to always act as if she had everything and never behave modestly. After all, people will immediately understand when she has nothing left. She thought that she would be torn to pieces as soon as they realized that she was an Empress only in words, and the Emperor did not put her in anything. The next day, she asked the maid who was in charge of important state affairs. One of the girls said that this position is still vacant. Hearing this, Adele asked if Diane Poitiers was in charge of everything, because someone had to replace a person in this position. The maids bowed their heads, showing that they were embarrassed to say this, but one of them confirmed that it was. After asking who was doing it before Diane, the girl heard that it was Hannah Giggs, the Earl's wife. She ordered to immediately call the Countess and tell her that the Empress wanted to meet with her, and also ordered to bring the laws of the Empire of the latest edition. Adele sat at the table and carefully studied the laws of the Echmont Empire, turning one page after another. She thought that the Emperor had given the management of the palace to Empress Diane. As she closed the book, she thought about the fact that she had acquired an exclusive right along with the title, which made her happy. Adele was distracted from her thoughts when the maid said that she had a visitor. It was Elizabeth, who greeted the Empress with a smile. She said that they had met at a banquet, and Adele smiled back and said that she was glad to see her Grace and wanted to meet her too. Taking a seat across from the Empress, Elizabeth asked if they could speak in private as the maid bowed. Adele immediately asked the girl who served the table to leave the room for a while. The Duchess thought to herself that the Empress was shorter than she had thought before, but she did not have the feeling that she was weak. While Adele drank tea in silence, her guest thought about the dominating aura around the Empress. Adele even stopped the cup halfway to her lips when she heard the confession that Elizabeth liked her. The girl said that she heard as if she called Hannah Giggs said that she was her nanny. But Adele asked why the guest spoke to her about this topic. Liz calmly said that the fact that the Empress called Hannah meant that she wanted to consolidate her position in the palace. She said that it will be difficult, because Diane Poitiers is in charge of everything, and behind her and the Emperor is Duke d'Espone, and all the people in the palace obey him. Adele interrupted the story, saying that she wanted to ask something. Will the fact that she wants to run the palace on her own affect the Duchess? Thinking that Adele is straightforward, she says that the Emperor is under Diane's spell and can't think clearly, so she wants Adele to cut the ropes that control Karl. Adelaide asked if she would achieve this by running the palace. Elizabeth said yes, and so did Hannah Giggs will help her a lot in this. She recommended advertising that she was looking for an assistant. Liz said that the management of the palace is often done by a woman, but it would be very nice if a man became her assistant. She said that every time her father changed concubines, her mother would get a new assistant. With a smile, Adele asked if she understood correctly that Elizabeth was saying that she should also have a lover if the Emperor had a concubine. But the girl said, looking directly at Adele, that she was not saying that she should harm Carla, but in the Empire it is important not to let yourself be spat in porridge to save face. The Empress reached for her tea, hearing that people would whisper and not take her seriously if she didn't do anything after such insults. Liz said that the probability was small, but if Duke Valdor applied, she should immediately accept his candidacy. Hannah Giggs had a connection with the past Empress, so she was Elizabeth's nanny. For a long time she held the position of head of the palace, but her life began to deteriorate after the appearance of one person. It was Diane Poitiers who spoiled Giggs's life in the palace and gradually took away everything she had. She was the cause of the death of the past Empress. Even now, the Countess was upset, thinking about her friend's death and thinking that Diane was incredibly similar to the Emperor's mother. And when Karl fell in love with her, the girl quickly changed her ways and, starting to manage the affairs of the palace, drove Hannah out of their gigs. The old lady, who had previously been kicked out of the palace with a scandal, now stood before the new Empress with an excitement she could not explain. The woman wiped away a tear, apologizing for her reaction, and explained that she had not been in the palace for too long that the tears were welling up. Adele said that the palace must have remained the same as during the life of the past Empress. The Countess said, placing her hand on the sofa, that she remembered how she had chosen it, but it would be nice to replace it. With a barely noticeable smile, Adele said that she wanted to entrust these matters to her and asked if the Countess agreed to the proposal. Hannah said that she would be glad to return to her duties, but was sure that His Majesty would not like it very much. But the Empress only smiled more noticeably, asking Lady Giggs if she agreed. But she smiled back, saying that, as she said before, she would gladly accept this offer. One of the maids interrupted them, awkwardly informing them that the dress she had ordered earlier had already arrived. Adele turned her head towards the girl, asking what the problem was then. And the Countess, after the servant's uncertain attempts to speak, asked why she did not speak and told her to tell everything as it is. Adelaide's eyes widened when she heard that the finance department said they couldn't pay for the Empress's dress. She turned her head to face Hannah Giggs, asking her advice on whether or not to call the merchants and pay them off personally. The countess said that gossip would only make it worse, and that it must be done to prevent more gossip from spreading, and that they must be paid enough to keep their mouths shut. Adele heard Hannah tell her to leave the matter to her, and that she would do everything right herself. She squinted at her, weighing all the pros and cons. She ordered the maid to bring the merchants, and she obeyed with trepidation. Walking over to the gold that was in the bag in her room, Adelaide thought that she hadn't known that she would need her own gold supply so soon. And if she is challenged, she will accept it. Hannah Giggs said she would look at the quality of the dress and pay later as she put the gold bar into the bag. She asked if she could give the full amount to the merchants and not return the balance. She also said that she hoped that the honor of the Empress would not be tarnished by such an event. Adele asked Hannah how, in her opinion, this could happen. The countess said she thought her palace had not been budgeted for. Adele put her hand to her face, not believing her ears, and wondering how this could happen. She heard that the budget for the next year was drawn up at the end of last year, and she appeared quite recently. The girl, visibly irritated, asked if it turns out that it always happens like this, and it should be like that. But Hannah said no, and that funding could be given in another way. When she heard about the budget through which she could get funding, and that only the emperor had access to it, she thought about it. Meanwhile, the girl timidly turned to the Empress and said that she had brought the merchant. Both women looked at the door where the maid was standing, and the Empress ordered him to enter. While the girl was calling the merchant, the Empress turned her head to the woman, saying that she had high hopes for her. Hannah told her not to worry. When Hannah asked where the Empress was going, she replied with a smile that she needed to meet her enemy in person. She told Hannah to stay in her palace today. The servants of the palace opened their mouths when they saw the Empress in front of them, walking through the corridors of the palace. They greeted each other, and she said that it looked like there was a central meeting going on. When she heard that this was indeed the case, Adelaide told the two boys that she was requesting an audience with the Emperor. One of them asked to wait in the living room while he informed the Emperor. But Adele said there was no need to do that. She said she would wait in the waiting room of the meeting room and asked to take her there. One of the men at the meeting begged the Emperor to send them strikers to help bring down the tower and kippers to help keep the peace in the lands. Karl listened without emotion as people died there and winged monsters flew out of the tower. This was watched by Lionel Valdor and another minister who saw the Emperor's lack of reaction, while Augustus sat and thought that this peasant asking for help lacked the intelligence to analyze the situation. Count Poitiers, Diane's brother, asked Count Kelvin whether he was exaggerating too much, because they have a tower of the 4th level. But the man said that Poitiers does not understand, because the portal grows and expands, and if such monsters appeared, how can it remain at the 4th level? Poitiers said that they could send help to them. But what would they do if a level 1 tower fell on the Emperor's palace at this time? Hearing his pleas called selfish, Earl Calvin became enraged, asking if Lennox had said everything. Poitiers. But he also got angry, banging on the table and angrily asking if he was right, that the request to send the strikers was selfish. Meanwhile, hearing screams through the door, Adele listened intently, wondering if she had heard the tower come down. Lionel Waldor drew attention to himself by addressing the Emperor and saying that he believed that aid should be sent to Count Kelvin's domain urgently. He said that they have enough people. Lennox asked what the minister was saying and said that one might think that their magicians in the palace were doing something stupid. Karl pounded the table with his hand, telling her to stop and that there was no end to the argument. He turned to Count Kelvin, saying that he was sorry that this had happened to his land and said that he would consider his request. The Count sobbed visibly, begging His Majesty to understand him, but Karl closed his eyes and said that this meeting was over and that everyone could be free. Count Kelvin understood, sobbing, that everything was over, that his lands would disappear and he would not wait for help. One of the servants bent over the Emperor, informing him that the Empress was waiting for him. He told the boy to bring the Empress here as soon as the meeting hall was free. Everyone who left the meeting room bowed to greet Adelaide and said they were glad to welcome her. They just looked at all this. Adele thought that Karl had decided not to send the magicians. She thought she wanted to meet Count Calvin in person. August Ulrich Desponi drew her attention, calling her his daughter-in-law, and said with a smile that he was glad to see her. She was as surprised as the others when he called her, the Empress, his daughter-in-law. She thought that he did it for a reason. Augustus said with a smile that he was sorry if it offended her, and he, as the Emperor's elder uncle, wanted to show friendliness. But Adelaide answered without malice in the tone of the Empress that there were other ways to show friendliness and told him to be more careful in the future. With a sly smile, he bowed and said he would take her words into consideration. Lionel bowed before her Valdor, greeting the Empress. "He is the only one who has done it the way it was needed." She smiled as she said his name and showed that she remembered him well. Adele said she was glad to see him and announced that she had just wanted to ask who Count Calvin was here. Lionel began to look for him in the crowd. The Count stood with tears in his eyes and looked at the Empress. Approaching, he bowed low, greeting Her Majesty. She asked if he said that flying monsters appeared on his territory. When he said it was, Adele asked if there were mages in charge of these lands. Lennox Poitiers bowed and said that he was pleased to meet you and that he was the vice-captain of the magicians, before announcing that the magicians were distributed by the palace. She said that such monsters fly out of the tower, and she was assigned to the 4th level and that, judging by the conversations, help would not wait there. Lennox said that the Empress must be worried, but assured her that he would protect the palace and she should not worry about it. She smiled, asking how, but she thought that this guy clearly underestimated her. When she was called by the Emperor, Adele returned as she walked into the meeting hall and said that she was very happy to meet everyone. As he watched her walk away, Lionel thought that her reserved demeanor and cold demeanor showed her to be of the upper class, just as she had been the day they met. Karl Ulrich Echmont looked at his wife without saying a word. She walked towards him, bypassing the empty chairs, and did not take her eyes off him for a second. When she sat down on the chair right next to him, he glanced at her and asked what exactly she wanted to talk to him about. She asked why he decided to marry her, looking at him again and not looking away. And when he asked what exactly she meant, Adele asked why he decided that she was suitable for the Empress. After all, it was he who sent the marriage proposal. Taking the pen, he said that her existence was like the pen he held in his hands, and that her presence alone is enough. Adele thought about what he had said about a feather, not even a quill, but a soft feather that flies in the wind. The girl asked if he really meant for her to sit with the title of Empress and do nothing. And after that, she asked what she was worried about, why he was spoiling her reputation. But he said he didn't do that. Adelaide directly asked if he was afraid that she might harm Diane Poitiers. Seeing his reaction, Adele got up from her chair, bowed, and said that she was glad that he saw her as an empress, because in this their views coincided. But after that she straightened up and said that she would fulfill all her duties, and therefore she hoped that he, as the emperor, would contribute to this. Clasping his hands in front of him, Karl asked, looking at his wife, what kind of help she expected from him. She said that to begin with, she needed an assistant to help her manage the affairs of the empire. She said that it would be good to consult with the manager, but she is Diane Poitiers, saying that she can't call her to consult with her, so she says she wants to cast Hannah for the role gigs. She said that she had heard that the emperor had kicked her out of the palace, so she was asking him to bring her back. But she said that she does not plan to restore her in the role of manager. As she was leaving, she stopped and turned her head to him, saying that the Empress's palace was not taken into account when the budget was allocated, and she hoped that he would use additional funding. And then, Adele left without even returning to her husband. She was dressed in a red dress, which was synonymous with the power of Empress Echmont. He remembered when he was a boy and called to Her Majesty, who had her back turned to him and was walking away. Karl remembered that he could never touch her hem, although he always reached out. When he cried because of it, his mother always felt sorry for him and comforted him. Mother then fixed his shirt and said that the Empress would never recognize him. Placing a hand to his forehead, he closed his eyes to banish those images from his childhood. But then he thought about the budget of the Empress's palace, because he did not think that it was not taken into account, because they had to do it. Calling one of the servants, Karl Ulrich ordered him to call Diane to him. She came with a sweet smile, hugging the documents. He coldly asked her if she had brought the documents related to the financing of the palace. Looking through the documents, he asked why the budget of the Empress's palace was not taken into account, because it should be done after her coronation. Poitiers pretended not to understand, then put her hand to her mouth, asking if she hadn't done it. When she started to cry, he interrupted her, telling Diane to stop and that she could consider the palace budget right now. He gave her a handkerchief, saying that she was about to start bawling. It was clear that Karl Ulrich was not happy about this. Sobbing, Diane wiped her face with a handkerchief and asked what she should do, because the Empress was probably angry. But Diane quickly stopped her tears and stopped crying, but asked with curiosity what exactly the emperor wanted to talk to her about. Charles said that the power of the Empress had been transferred to Her Highness, and that all matters within the country, which he had previously entrusted to her, would pass into Adelaide's hands. The boy told Lionel that Duke d'Espony wanted to replace the Empress with a puppet, so he found a girl in a distant empire, but he clearly missed. Lionel said that she really changes the atmosphere around her with just one look. While Lionel thought about his own, the boy said with a smile that he now understood why the Empress had sent her daughter so far away. After all, such a sister next to a 14-year-old emperor will only get in the way. But Lionel Valdor didn't listen, visibly lost in thought as he stared out the carriage window. He couldn't understand why, from the first day they met, Adele wouldn't leave his head. Hannah said that Her Majesty had done admirably, and she asked if the Countess had managed to pay for the dress. Hearing "but" after an affirmative answer, Adelaide stopped drinking tea and asked what the matter was. Hannah Giggs asked if she chose the dress she was wearing now. She said the maids asked if she wanted to wear it, and she agreed. The Countess said that she would order a new dress for her instead of this one, and Adele asked why and if there was anything in the tailoring of this dress that did not conform to the laws of the Empire. Hannah said no, nothing like that. But she looks like a past empress. Hearing that this could provoke the Emperor, because he has bad memories with his predecessor Adele, she thought about Hannah's words, but she still decided to listen to her advice and said that she would not wear such dresses. And she also told the Countess to call Count Kelvin to the palace, because she wanted to meet him personally. Diane was sitting on her bed in her room, completely devastated by Karl's decision regarding her responsibilities. She was really sobbing now, thinking that he had taken her power away from her so easily. The girl wondered what Adelaide had done to get all this so easily. Diane was shaking, and she thought only that Adele was lucky from the very birth. She got everything without effort, and it was unfair. She thought that he had given her this palace because his mother wanted to live here and she would not allow it to be taken away from her. She recalled how Karl had said that the budget for the Empress's palace should be allocated immediately, and therefore it would be her last task before her retirement. Diane called the servant and ordered to bring her the documents about the financing of the imperial palace, because some changes had to be made. She thought she would make her realize that she was just an empty shell with status. Appearing in front of Count Calvin, who was in her living room, Adelaide sat down opposite him and asked him when the tower appeared. Adele said that flying monsters appeared over time, and therefore she needed to know the diameter of the tower. She asked if it was getting wider. He said that it was so, and that as soon as he saw the monsters, he immediately came here. After all, they had neither strikers nor kippers, and the residents fight monsters as best they can. Adelaide asked, not believing her ears, if there really wasn't a single warrior. She said that the 4th level was above average, and perhaps no one had been sent to them, and the Count said that even the towers with the 2nd level were waiting for several days. The Empress thought, saying under her breath that this meant that people were left to their fate. When the Count began to recount the horrors of fighting monsters, Hannah interrupted him and told him to stop telling Her Majesty all this. But Adele said she understood how much the Count had downplayed the scale of hell on his lands. She remembered her mother, who said that one should be patient and not save everyone, because the tower was their chance. And then, the mother promised to throw the world at her daughter's feet. Adele then lowered her eyes, saying that her mother said that because she had not seen with her own eyes what people faced. Adelaide said then that she did not need the whole world. She thought it was the day her relationship with her mother cracked. After all, she took away the title of Crown Princess from her daughter. Earl Calvin rose, thanking her for her attention to his problem, and announced that he must go to his estates as soon as possible. Bowing to the Empress, the man widened his eyes in surprise as she ordered him to evacuate the residents to the nearest safe place. Adele said that the best shelter from such monsters is caves and dungeons, so she ordered women, children, old and wounded to be taken there. She said that he should make an agreement with the counties nearby that would help him hold on. The Empress turned her head to Hannah Giggs, speaking to her without words, only with a nod of the head. But she had to understand what she was ordered to do. Hannah handed the bag to Count Calvin, who did not understand what was happening. Seeing that it was gold, he asked why the Empress was doing this. She said that this should be enough to negotiate with the neighbors about their help. She apologized, saying that there was nothing more she could do to help in this situation. While Lionel looked at the papers, the boy asked why the Empress called Count Calvin. And he said that he did not think that the emperor would refuse help because the count was loyal to the emperor's family. Lionel asked if he was really trying to understand why the emperor would leave his subordinates in trouble, and also said that the boy was simply ridiculous in his efforts to understand. The brothers met Count Calvin near the carriage, seeing that he was in tears and leaning on a cane, carrying a bag in his hands. Seeing his condition, Lionel asked, grabbing him by the shoulders, if something had happened to him in the Empress's palace. But when he showed the gold bars that the Empress had given, Lionel stared at them in amazement, as if he had seen them for the first time. After saying that Adele had ordered the residents to evacuate, he thanked Duke Valdor and said that he must go to his lands. The other boy said he was sorry they couldn't help personally, but handed the Earl a bag of gold, the same one the Empress had given him. The Count told them to stop and burst into tears. He said he was so ashamed of himself. Looking at the trail of Kelvin's carriage, the boy said that the Empress surprised him. Meanwhile, Lionel wondered if she had really allocated the gold to help the residents of Count Kelvin's estate. As she sipped her tea, Adelaide said that the only thing she could do was give the Earl a few gold bars. Hannah said that the Empress did everything she could do in this situation. Looking down, she asked if it was really all she could, but her thoughts drifted to the past. Her mother then told her that she is smart, but the world is set up in such a way that the smart create and the wise capture. She told her daughter to act wisely. Bowing her head, Adele thought now that she endured insults and humiliation and could only give a little money to someone in need, and all because she had no power. Pouring more tea, Hannah Giggs asked if the Empress would request an audience with the Emperor, while she thought she should think things through. Adele turned her head to Hannah, who said that they were in Echmont and that it was necessary to establish contact with the Emperor.
Adelaide put on makeup, styled her hair in curls, and looked at herself in the Hannah said she looked amazing.
She kept thinking about what wise act would make her life in the Empire easier. First, Adelaide thought, she should establish contact with the Emperor and do everything to make their relationship good. Karl was surprised to hear the announcement that Her Majesty had come to him. She stood in front of him as Karl studied her golden eyes, red lips, perfect collarbones, and snow-white skin. As his wife sat across from him, the Emperor realized that she looked completely different now than she had in their previous meetings. Karl even made something of a smile when he asked what brought Adele to him at such a late hour. She asked if he wanted to share the meal with her, if he hadn't had dinner yet, of course. The man smiled, saying that he was just about to talk to her. All gaiety disappeared, and he seriously asked the girl why she called Count Calvin to her, addressing her by her title. Adelaide, without taking her eyes off her husband, said that she was interested in what was happening on his lands, and she asked what he was hinting at after the question, whether it was just curiosity. Karl said the Earl's lands were dying and he wouldn't help him, so he just sent him back, and asked why she called Count Kelvin to her. He smiled again, saying that, judging by the gossip, she also gave the gold to the Count. He asked what she was doing, pretending that she was noble. He said if she didn't want to hear that she was generous and noble unlike her husband the Emperor. But Adele said that she did not understand him. She explained that she called to find out about the situation on the Count's lands, and also gave some money so that he could evacuate people. Adele asked why he was framing her actions as a crime. Approaching her, he looked straight into her eyes, telling her to close her eyes and think only of good things. Again called her the Empress. She said that it was an act of humanity that she could not help but do, looking into his eyes. But Karl was smiling, still leaning over her, and asking if it turns out that he is not human, since he did not help. And she asked if she said so. The Emperor replied that this made him very happy, because as soon as she became Empress, the people immediately became her family. Adele could feel her hands trembling, but she was surprised that the Emperor took the scythe in his hand without taking his eyes off the Empress's face. He looked at her collarbone, thinking that her bones were so fragile, he only needed to squeeze a little harder for her neck to break and her breathing to stop. But instead, Karl bent down and, closing his eyes, breathed in the sweet scent that emanated from his wife. He asked himself, was this the woman who had drawn attention to him earlier? Adele looked at him with incomprehension, singling out his lips, which were so close to hers. Karl asked why she had that expression on her face, smiling again. He asked if she had come to him in such an image and against the night, so as not to tempt him. Looming over her, Karl Ulrich said that if she asked him to hug her, he would. He said that it would be nice to spend their lost wedding night today. Running his fingers over her face, he looked into the girl's eyes, telling her to close her eyes, because he was going to kiss her. When he leaned down and was inches from her lips, Adelaide told him to stop. But when she wanted to push him away, Karl caught her hand and now held her wrist. His cheerful mood seemed to evaporate again. Looking down at her, he said that he knew she was once Gothrov's crown princess. He said, while Adele was sulking, that her eyes really corresponded to royal status, but he told her not to forget that he was the emperor here. He said that he likes innocent and docile girls, and ordered not to interfere in his affairs anymore. He turned and walked away, saying she could go too. Adelaide leaned against the wall in order not to lose her balance, because she was in a bad state. She constantly scrolled through what happened in the room and felt disgusted. But then, Diane Poitiers appeared in the corridors, asking with innocent eyes if it was really Her Majesty. She asked what she was doing here. While Adele thought that she would least of all like to see her, the blonde came closer and asked if she was all right, because the Empress was shaking all over. In a commanding tone, Adele ordered the girl away, wondering what had happened to her face. Leaning closer, Diane whispered that she had a nice makeup, that she must have taken her advice, but something had gone wrong, and that's why she was running away. Adele, not believing her ears, asked what she had just said. Diane told her to wear less makeup because she looks very pale. Adelaide wanted to get to her room as quickly as possible, but Poitiers' question, "Isn't that why you're running away?" sounded in her head. Running up the stairs, she did not notice how her leg went wrong, but the next second, instead of falling, she ended up in the arms of Lionel, who held her tightly and was so close to her. The man hugged her for those seconds, afraid to even breathe, so as not to frighten her. She looked at the man in front of her in surprise, not believing who she saw, because she even questioned him, calling him by name.